Hello everybody, it's Hater, and we need to have a talk about Sunbracers. You see, these pair of exotic arms have slowly been creeping up on the meta as of late, receiving indirect buff after indirect buff, to the point now, I truly think that they may be able to rise up and dethrone the soon-to-be nerfed king, Starfire Protocol. With the build we'll be going over today, we're going to become an unstoppable barrage of solar grenades, with borderline infinite restoration, radiant, and melee energy, at the same time gaining our super back within ridiculous speeds, and most of all, an unlimited supply of solar grenades that turns even raid bosses into a literal joke. But as always, for your guys' ease of use, there's going to be a dim loadout link down in the description, and while you're at it, if you want to see more content like this in the future, then consider giving the video a like and subscribe so you'll never miss out on a brand new video. But to get things started though, let's talk about how the build actually works. And it's all going to start with the exotic Sunbracers. Its perk is first going to increase the overall lifetime of solar grenades. Then whenever we get a solar melee kill, it's going to give us a buff called Sunbracers Ready for 5 seconds, fully refunding our solar grenade in the process. If we then throw our solar grenade while this buff is active, the perk is going to refresh itself and give us unlimited solar grenades until the timer runs out. Our goal here with the build is to spam this as much as possible so we can get the most out of it in the forms of healing, damage, and other buffs. However, the most important of them all comes down to the solar melee, and at almost all times, we're going to use the Incinerator snap. Now, I will say, you do have the option of using Celestial Fire over Incinerator Snap, if that's your preference, but I'm going to explain to you why using Celestial Fire is going to hurt the build more than help it. You see, Sunbracers by itself is already a very buggy exotic when it comes to hit confirming a melee attack for its perk, and if you end up not getting a kill with your melee, it puts you in this weird downtime situation where you're waiting for either a grenade or a melee to come back. That's where Incinerator Snap sort of mitigates this frustration, because for example, take Celestial Fire over to Carl, hitting him isn't really going to do all that much damage and leave him scorched for a short period of time. If we take Incinerator Snap instead, this time aiming near the floor close to him, we're gonna do significantly more damage and ignite him at the same time. This tactic alone is what's gonna make getting Sunbracers feel so much more consistent. But to move things along, to pair with the build, we're going to be using Phoenix Dive as our class ability. Not only is it going to have a much shorter cooldown versus both of the rifts, but it allows us to immediately descend to the ground and heal us for a short burst. However, the real reason we're using it in the first place is to take advantage of the aspect Heat Rises. Heat Rises is going to allow us to eat our grenade, healing us for a small amount, and gain a 15-second buff. During this time, we become much more floaty, being able to lock ourselves in the air, fire our weapons, throw grenades, and use our melee. The real kicker though is that while this buff is active, any kill will extend Heat Rise's timer, but if we're in the air gliding, it's also going to refund melee energy, feeding right back into Sunbracers. As for how this impacts Phoenix Dive, on the other hand, when we have Heat Rises active, this is going to cause Phoenix Dive to give us a 2x restoration buff instead of a small burst of healing, and on top of that, it's even going to apply Scorch stacks to enemies nearby the landing zone. This is even going to synergize again with Incinerator Snap, because if we get into a scenario where the snap didn't ignite an enemy, just simply jumping in the air and quickly using Phoenix Dive is going to immediately trigger an ignition. On top of that, if that ignition ends up killing the enemy, it's also going to proc Sunbracers, because the source of Scorch stacks were originally from our melee attack. To move on though, for our other aspect, it's important that we use Touch of Flame. All this is going to do is simply upgrade some of our grenades' capabilities. In the case of solar grenades, it causes them to not only last longer, which again synergizes with Sunbracers, but more importantly, spew out balls of lava over their lifetime. Now, these balls of lava are going to be playing a humongous role in what we can do in the build because of one major reason. Solar grenades function very uniquely where only one instance of them can be active at any given time on one enemy. If you're familiar with Wither Horde, it functions very similarly. These balls of lava, however, seem to bypass this limitation. In layman's terms, with a little creativity, it's possible to solo one-phase raid bosses like Riven of 1,000 Voices. But enough of me rambling on about the damage potential of these grenades, let's talk about the fragments that are gonna pair best with the build. And starting out on the left, we're using Ember of Searing. This is going to give us melee energy back whenever we kill enemies that are scorched, basically doubling down on heat rises. This gives us a really consistent way to get our melee back, and weapons that scorch enemies are also going to pair great with this fragment because it makes it where we're not relying on only our abilities to scorch enemies. Exotic weapons like Prometheus Lens, Skyburner's Oath, and Polaris Lance are great choices. Then legendary weapons that roll with the perk Incandescent, like my personal favorites Retraced Path, Prime Mutiny, and Callous Mini Tool are all great examples. Moving on though, for the next fragment, Ember of Empyrean is where all of our survivability in the build comes from. It allows solar weapon and ability kills to extend both restoration and radiant buffs applied to us. This combined with Phoenix Dive and our next fragment, Ember of Torches, allows our basic rotation of abilities to give us an indefinite source of 25% weapon damage and 2x restoration as long as we're killing things. As for the final fragment though, at the very end, it's Ember of Ashes. This is simply going to allow all sources of scorch stacks that we create 50% more. This goes for our grenades, Incinerator Snap, Phoenix Dive, and any scorch-based weapons in the loadout. Now, before we get into the armor, as far as it really goes for our artifact, we don't really need much to make the build work. But if there were any of the mods that I could recommend you guys to pick up, it would be Shatter Orbs for Orbs of Power every time you break a matching shield, then Authorize Mods Grenade and Solar to cut down on prices of mods in our armor for later. The rest are mostly preference, but if you want to get creative and pair void weapons with the build, you can pick up Authorized Mods Void, Volatile Flow, and Bricks from Beyond to help enhance them. This build's gonna last even after this season, so if you're watching this video in a future season, feel free to change out any of the artifact mods to whatever you currently have. But now moving on over to the armor, first things first, for stats, you guys of course are going to want 100 resilience for 30% damage resistance, then as close to 100 recovery as you can get, and finally discipline and strength as high as you can get to maximize on all three of our abilities. Starting out over at the helmet, we're using an Ashes to Asset, so grenade kills give us super energy, an elemental siphon to match whatever weapon type we're using in the loadout. I'm using an incandescent weapon, so mine's gonna be solar. Then in the end slot, it's mostly preference. I use a heavy ammo finder, but feel free to change it out to whatever you want. Next up though, over at the Sunbracers, and we're using a firepower, so grenade kills are going to spawn Orbs of Power. Then we're pairing both a momentum transfer and bolstering detonation, so dealing damage with our grenades will give our other abilities energy back. Now, onto the chest piece, and all we need here is a singular charge up. This is going to increase the max stacks of armor charge we can have by 1, then the extra slots at the end are up for preference. I like using 2 elemental reserves, but if you want, you can replace them with an extra charged up or any mods of your choosing. Next up though, moving on over to the boots, and we're using 3 copies of an elemental surge mod of our choosing, so we can buff up weapon damage by 22%. Feel free to move these around to whatever energy you want depending on your loadout, but I will say if you feel like you're not getting your melee back fast enough, you can drop one of these surges and replace it with a singular invigoration. This only drops your surge damage bonus down to 17%, but it allows you to gain even more melee energy. Finally though, moving on over to the class item, and we're using a Reaper mod, so after using our Phoenix Dive, our next weapon kill will guarantee an Orb of Power. Then we're using a Time Dilation, so our armor charge stacks will decay slower. As for the mod at the end, if you do have enough space, you can put in an Outreach mod, so when you do use your Phoenix Dive, it will also give us some melee energy back on top of everything else. Overall though guys, that's going to be it for today's build video. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them down in the comments and let me know what you think about the build. Sunbracers, in my opinion, are without a doubt one of the best Warlock exotics in the game right now, and definitely when Starfire Protocol inevitably gets nerfed, Sunbracers, I think, are going to take their spot as King of Solar Warlock. Either way though, I hope you guys enjoy the video. I'm going to catch you in the next one. Bye bye.